Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have our UIC Alumni Exchange program with you. I am Emily Ann Walrath, and I have the privilege of serving UIC alumni as a staff member with the UIC Alumni Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this UIC Alumni Exchange program. Through the UIC Alumni Exchange series, we work to bring our alumni and friends programs and topics so you can explore, connect, and even escape from the everyday with a community of UIC alumni, staff, and faculty experts like Dr. Lin. You will hear me say this a number of times today, but I highly encourage you to visit go.uic.edu/alumni exchange to learn about the upcoming and explore past programs. And with that, I'm excited to introduce today's program and faculty expert, UIC College of Engineering's Dr. Jane Lin. You may be aware that transportation consumes most of our petroleum-based fuel and emits nearly 1/3 of harmful emissions. But there may be a solution by using electric vehicles, and Dr. Lin is here today to discuss the state of electrification, incentive programs, and the environmental impacts. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you so you can begin the program.
Thank you, Emily Ann. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and good afternoon, everybody. And as Emily Ann mentioned, my name is Jay Lin. I'm a professor of transportation engineering in the Department of Civil Materials and Environmental Engineering in the College of Engineering here at UIC. So my research is mainly focused on sustainable transportation with a focus on environmental sustainability, especially looking at ways and solutions to reduce the negative impact on the environment from transportation systems. So today's talk is along this line of research, but I'm going to give a more like a high-level overview of the electrification of transportation towards the goal of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants from transportation. So I'm going to start with EV, electric vehicles, right? So I'm going to start with a small quiz. So feel free to write your answer to the chat box. And then in 5 minutes, I'm going to give my answers, and you can check if you get the answers correctly. So in terms of the powertrain mechanism, how many types of EV are out there? If you can write your answers to the chat box, feel free to do so. And then in 5 seconds, I'm going to give you the answer. All right, okay. So I see people are typing, very good. So you're very engaged. So there are actually two types of EVs. So one is called the hybrid EV, HEV, we call it, or the plug-in EV. So these are the later generation of EV, or we call it PEV. So keep in mind with all these acronyms, because later on I'm going to use these acronyms throughout my talks. So what are the differences between the HEV or the plug-in EV, the PEVs? So the two main differences based on how the eco is powered, and also based on how the battery is charged, right? So basically, the hybrid EV is the earlier generation of EV. So now they're still in the market, and they're still, people are still buying them. So the HEVs are basically powered by still the internal combustion engine. So it's still based on the conventional the engine technology, this internal combustion engine, but they have a electric motor. So the key thing here is the batteries on board is not charged by this plug-in outlet, but rather it's charged by this what's called the regenerative braking. So when the vehicle is braking, you actually generate the energy from this braking. So this is called the regenerative energy. And then this energy will return back to charge the battery on board. So that's called the hybrid vehicle. And then the newer generation, the plug-in EV or the PEV, actually there are two types of PEVs. One is called the, probably you are very familiar with, this acronym is called the plug-in hybrid EV or the PHEV. And then the second type of PEV is basically the pure battery EV, or sometimes we'll just call it EV or the BEV, right? So the main difference between these two is basically that the plug-in hybrid EV, the PHEV, you still have an internal combustion engine consuming the gasoline. So you still may go to the gas station to fill up the tank with gasoline. But you can also use the battery to power your car. So the battery will be charged from this plug-in outlet. So that's the main difference from the hybrid EV, right? And so one example would be, for example, nowadays the Toyota Prius Prime is the plug-in hybrid EV. So actually, this is the most popular EVs nowadays on on the road or on the market. And all EV or the battery EVs, obviously, there's no internal combustion engine anymore. So the vehicles do not use gasoline at all. So it's all powered by this electric motor. So you have this battery, which is charged from this power outlet. You have the plug-in, and so it's purely powered by electricity. So one famous example is the Tesla Model 3, right? So it's pure battery powered. Okay. So interestingly, EV is not a new idea. So even though now there are many talks about EVs and electrification of transportation, but this is not a new idea. So can anybody guess when was the first EV or electric car that ever came out in the US? What year was that, or when that was? So it was actually more than 130 years ago. So believe it or not, so EV is not new. So the first one was actually in 1890. So when this William Morrison, so he was a chemist, and so he actually built this electric car, which also had the top speed of 14 miles per hour, very slow, but that was the very first electric car that was built in the United States. And in Europe, actually, it was even a little bit earlier than that, but the very first one in the US was actually in 1890. And then by 1900, by the turn of the last century, so EVs were actually in the heydays, so most of the vehicles at that time was actually electric vehicles. And during the next 10 years, at last century, so at the beginning of last century, so they still show very strong market desire and market sales. The reason for that is at that time, because people just started buying cars and to replace for example the horse-powered wagons, and so generally speaking the trips were much shorter. So for electric cars, that was perfect. So the range, there was never a range anxiety issue at that time. But things started to turn south for EVs when the famous Model T by Henry Ford came out and basically just wiped the market, and electric cars sort of going, the share of electric cars went down. And the Model T was powered by gasoline and started taking up the market. But as history oftentimes repeats, EV started to come back due to a number of things. One thing was in the 1970s, there was this gasoline shortage, the fuel shortage, or the energy crisis in the 1970s. So people started thinking, well, we need to look for alternative ways to power cars, right? We cannot keep burning fossil fuel energies. And so that was one contributing factor. And then the other one was this landmark legislation, the 1990 Clean Air Act amendment, really push, so this was passed by the Congress and really to push this electrification of vehicles or transportation. So then obviously we know that, the Toyota Prius was almost the very first generation of EVs, the hybrid EVs coming on in the late 1990s. And so starting from that, and then more recently, Tesla's success in this Model 3 and so on. So really accelerated their whole development of EV and the adoption of EV. And now all the major car manufacturers are really pushing this, the cells and the development of EVs right throughout the world. And I think in the future, so we all know that last year's COP26 summit. And so one of the few positive things that came out of that summit was like, the majority of the countries around the world agreed to adopt this, strategies and policies towards electrification of transportation, right? So I think, really this electrification of transportation is picking up speed from this point on. So then, so for example, as recently as about a month ago, so the Biden administration, announced this $5 billion investment into expanding the EV charging infrastructure throughout the country. And then in response to that, the U.S. Department of Transportation issued this memorandum to basically provide background and funding eligibility and the program guidance for how to implement this investment, this $5 billion investment into building this national network of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. So what are the electrification programs existing around the country, state by state? So this map actually shows, state by state, the clean vehicle policies and incentive programs. So if you actually, click on this link that's provided at the bottom of this slide, you can actually, go into this website and see this interactive programs. So I'm actually going to just switch to that and just have a little bit of a, show you a little bit of what's happening in some of the states. So these states are color coded, right? So each color represents the different levels of electrification programs or incentives by different states, right? So for example, if you look at, so the purple color represents the states that have some kind of a clean energy vehicle incentives programs. Okay, so this including the state of Illinois. Yeah, and then if you look at this green color, so basically they represent states that have the zero vehicle emission program. So the difference between the purple and the green is that the purple ones is basically a very general clean energy vehicle incentive program, but it doesn't have to be zero emission vehicles, right? So it's the thing that it's clean energy vehicles. So the green ones are the states that actually have zero emission vehicle programs. And then you can see that some of this this light greenish color represents states that have some sort of electric vehicle financial incentive programs to encourage the electrification of vehicles. And then you have this blue color states. So these are the states that represent the most advanced electrification programs. For example, California is the front runner in this regard. So they have not only the zero emission vehicle programs and the incentives, but they actually also have the zero emission vehicle standards in place. So they actually have set up the standards saying, well, for the zero emission vehicles, these are the standards that the car manufacturers have to follow. Okay, so let I'm going to switch back to so this table is basically just summarizes what we just saw from the previous slide, this interactive map. But you can see that it's actually a lot less states included in this table. The reason for that is I only included the states that have explicit programs or incentives of financing programs for EVs. So you can see that state of Illinois is not one of them, right? So you can see California is by far the front runner in all regards in terms of the low emission vehicle emission standards, the zero emission vehicle emission standards, and the programs, financial incentives, and then also electrification of not just the passenger vehicles, but commercial vehicles, trucks, and as well as the charging facility infrastructure incentives. So California has all the things covered. And then if you go down the list, various states, have some of these programs, but not all of them, right? And then at the bottom of it, you basically see that, for example, state of Washington, Colorado, and Pennsylvania, they pretty much only have the EV financial incentives. They don't have for example, the zero emission vehicle programs or the standards, things like that, right? So this is just to reiterate, what we have seen from the previous map and the table. So by far, California is the leader in terms of the zero emission vehicle standards, programs, and the financial incentives. And then number of the Northeast states are following California's lead in adopting the California's low emission vehicle standards and the zero emission vehicle programs and the incentives. And then there's Oregon and New York have some zero emission vehicle programs. And then, as I mentioned, Washington, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. The states basically have only the EV financial incentive programs. And I must also mention that even though the state of Illinois is not, on this list, but it doesn't mean that Illinois is not doing anything. I think as early as recently, Governor Pritzker mentioned some initiative to push the EV charging stations in the state of Illinois. And the Illinois Department of Transportation is actually very actively looking into the electrification of transportation in the state of Illinois. And they're funding a number of electrification related research. And I actually currently have one ongoing research with IDOT looking into strategies to electrify trucks, these are long haul trucks or the regional trucks. So it's very exciting research opportunity right now. All right, okay, so what is the current status of EV cells and infrastructure? So currently, it's a little bit more than 3% of the new vehicle sales are electric vehicles, so not a lot. So we are only at the beginning of the electrification of transportation. But recently, by the Bloomberg's New Energy Finance, they project that by 2040, so 58% of the global passenger vehicle sales will be coming from electric vehicles, right? And at the same time, meaning during the same time by 2040, so these EVs will make up about less than 1/3 of all the cars on the road. So basically, what it means is the EV sales are accelerating during this time, so from now to 2040. But at the same time, we still have a long way to go because by that time, it's only still 1/3 of the total vehicles on the road, right? So we still have a long way to go. And then this picture shows the annual EV sales in terms of the HEV, the hybrid EV, and the plug-in EV. So this data is provided by the Argonne National Lab, which is right located in the suburb of Chicago here, and it's one of the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy laboratories. So what you see here, so this data goes from 1999 to 2019, right? So as I mentioned, the HEV is the earlier generation of EVs. So at the beginning, so there was no sales data for the plug-in EVs only until about a decade ago. So the PEV started coming into the market, the EV market. But the interesting thing is they quickly take over the EV sales market, right? So this red bars are the PEV sales. So they are basically, dominating the market right now. So more than the HEVs, right? So, but overall, you're looking at over a million EVs, so including the HEVs and the PEVs in the EV sales market right now. Okay. And then just to zoom in a little bit, so if we look at the top 5 EV makes and models in the overall sales, so on the left table shows you the PEVs, so including the plug-in hybrid EV and the battery EV, and the right table shows you the hybrid EVs, right? So no surprise, Toyota Prius is the very early model and make of the HEV. So they are still dominating the HEV sales market. And Tesla Model 3 is actually #1 in the PEV or the pure battery EV model sales. So that's actually very interesting because the Tesla Model 3 only came out a few years ago, but they're growing very quickly. And right now they're actually on the top of the EV sales in this category. So that's very interesting. And then if you go down the list, you can see, for example, the Chevy Volt and the Nissan Leafs. These are very common EVs we see nowadays. Okay, so in terms of the charging infrastructure, so this is what it looks like. So a lot of dots here. So, but basically, we're looking at over 46,000 EV charging stations throughout the country, right? So you see a lot more on the West Coast, and then the Great Lakes region, and then the East Coast all the way down, right? So this charging stations include all the levels of charging technologies, including the level 1, level 2, and what's called the DC fast charging technology. So these are the current available charging technologies. So what is level 1? Level 1 is the slowest charging technology. So basically, you're looking at roughly every hour of charging. So it allows the vehicle to drive 2 to 5 miles every hour. So this type of charging stations is only less than 5% of the public EVSE port. EVSE stands for the electric vehicle supply equipment. So basically it's the EV charging ports, right? So so that's because it's, so the level 1 is mainly those who are in the residential area. So at home, your EV charging port is the level 1, typically the level 1. So that's why it's not very suitable for the public charging facility because, it's too slow for charging even a small passenger vehicle. So most common charging stations are the level 2 charging stations. So what this means is, every hour of charging, basically the battery allows the car to drive 10 to 20 miles of the distance, right? So that makes up about, over 80%. So this is the most common charging technology available publicly. And the DC fast charging station also coming to the market. So now it's about 15% of the public charging stations using this DC fast charging, mostly for trucks, because for, trucks have a much bigger batteries. They need, a longer time to charge. And so and to reduce the charging time, you need to use this fast charging. So you can see that this, the speed of charging is much, much faster than even the level 2. So you're talking about every 20 minutes, it gets you, 60 to 80 miles of driving range. So that's a lot faster. Okay. And then if we zoom into the state of Illinois, so basically right now, Illinois has just a little bit less than 1,000 public charging stations. And each, and then the total ports, so each port allows one vehicle to plug in. So we are looking at, 2,300 discharging ports available throughout the whole state of Illinois. So we still have a long way to go, because you can see that a lot of these are concentrated in Chicago and the St. Louis region. So a lot less in between, right? And at the federal level, so the Federal Highway Administration is also pushing this EV corridors to be available to EV drivers. So if you look at this map, it shows the entire state of the continental United States, and you see that so this green line, solid lines, are what's called the EV ready corridors. And then this dash, a brown dash lines are what's called the EV pending corridors. So you can see that. So there are quite a number of EV ready corridors, like in the West Coast, the East Coast, and somewhere here in the Great Lake region, and then this this region as well. But there are a lot more corridors that are still pending. What that means is they're still planning on putting in the charging infrastructure along these corridors, so to make it ready for the EV drivers, the electric vehicles, to be safely driving on these corridors. So at the federal level, so they're also pushing this the charging infrastructure to be available for the EV drivers. Okay, so for the rest of my talk, so I'm going to actually devote my time in talking to you about the challenges and opportunities of electrification from the research and implementation point of view. So obviously you can imagine we're just at the beginning of electrification of transportation. So there are a lot of issues involved and challenges involved in electrification. So I won't have all the time to cover them all. So I'm just going to focus on these 4 points here. So one is the battery technology, charging technology, costs and benefits. So that's related to the adoption of EVs. So if the cost is too high, obviously, that will slow down or basically hinge the adoption of EVs. And then the last point I want to also briefly mention is the challenge in integration of power grid and electrified transportation. All right, so battery technology. So this is actually a very active area of research for new and cheap. So I want to highlight the word cheap. So we have a number of battery technologies available already, but the cost of battery is still a major stumbling block in adopting EVs, right? So this is a very active area of research involving material science people and material engineering people from chemistry, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and so on, right? So currently the average cost to replace an EV battery is around $5,500, so it's not cheap. Okay, so any new breakthrough in the battery technology to bring down the cost and also increase the durability of the battery, is a major breakthrough in this domain. So the types of batteries, so the most commonly used battery in the plug-in hybrid EV or the battery EV is the lithium ion batteries. So, right. And then for the hybrid EV, so the battery is usually the nickel metal hydride batteries. And then there's some other like the ancillary batteries on board for example, lead acid batteries and the ultra capacitor for providing additional power for other things in the vehicle, right, in the cabin. So I also want to highlight in the battery technology development. So one of the things, this is a more new challenge, is battery recycling. So we know that battery is mainly, chemical composition, right, of many things, materials and components. So at the end of the battery life, how we can, recycle the battery is a major challenge, and especially if we're pushing for all EV transportation future. So this is going to be, a huge challenge. And the main, bottleneck is basically how we can separate the different kinds of battery materials very efficiently at low cost. So that remains to be a very, very large challenge. And we all know that also battery has a negative environmental impact. So the better we can do the recycling, the better we can protect the environment, right? But this is a huge challenge because it's not an easy job, and especially it's very expensive right now to be able to efficiently recycle the materials from the used batteries. In terms of the charging technology, so as I mentioned before, so there are just three types of charging technology, right? So the level 1, level 2, and the DC fast charging technology, right? So to put all these different charging technologies in perspective, so if I use one example, which is this Swiss truck model called the E-Force one. So it's an 18-ton electric truck with a battery capacity of 300 kilowatt hours, which is a pretty sizable battery. And the energy consumption is roughly around 130 kilowatt hour per 100 kilometers. So every 100 kilometers driven, it consumes 130 kilowatt hours. So if we're looking at this electric truck, so that means it will take over more than 35 to 50 minutes of charging time, even if we are using the fastest charging technology, which is the DC fast charging technology. Or if we are using the level 2, so it takes 7 to 14 hours of charging time. So obviously, if we are looking at the electrification of commercial fleet, especially the large trucks, this remains a very, very big challenge, because how you can reduce this charging time is crucial for the commercial fleet managers. For passenger vehicles, the charging technology is more or less, I would say, mature, because it also has to do with how we use vehicles, right? For passenger vehicles, 90% of the times it's idling anyway. We're not using the vehicles 90% of the time. So we have enough time to let it sit in the garage and charge, right? But that's not the case for commercial vehicles or for electric trucks. They're constantly on the road. So to reduce this idling for charging, it's about reducing the cost for the fleet managers. So this is a main challenge for how to come up with this fast and reliable charging technologies for electric trucks. Okay, so there's some innovations how to charge electric trucks or freight vehicles, right? So for example, Siemens, the German company, they have implemented some pilot projects in Germany's Sweden and California, Southern California, looking at this what's called the e-highway corridor. So basically, you have this overhead power lines, and then as the truck goes, they're continuously charged from this overhead power lines, right? As the trucks are moving. So that at the first glance, obviously solve the problem of having to idle to charge, right? But obviously the issue is it's very costly infrastructure wise, right? Because you have to build this whole network of this overhead lines, and and then you probably have to have this dedicated lanes for trucks in order to implement this technology. So it's very costly. And so that's why these pilot projects are usually not more than 1 mile long, in all these places. And they're still, implementing, still piloting different technologies by Siemens. And then obviously Tesla has already mentioned for a while to develop this semi truck, the Tesla Semi, all electric freight vehicles. So this is supposed to be like the top of the line EV electric trucks, and a very large battery power, and so also basically promise the same level of performance of the conventional diesel trucks, but it hasn't come out yet, so we're still wait and see what's going to come out from Tesla. So with Elon Musk, anything is possible. So we'll wait and see. And then there's also this technology called the wireless energy transfer technology. And so the idea is you basically have this electric power line buried embedded in the pavement. And then this power line will wirelessly transmit electricity. So if a car drives on top of this power line, then basically it will wirelessly transfer the electricity to the vehicle, the battery in the vehicle, right? So that's the idea. And in fact, in UK, in London, they actually piloting this electric recharging lane. So with this technology, so you have this power line embedded here. So in this lane, so this is the exclusive lane for the electric cars. So when a car drive on this lane, they are also being charged wirelessly. But obviously the issue with this, again, is it's very costly in terms of the infrastructures, because you have to build this power line under the pavement. And also the reliability of this technology, because the wireless is a contactless transfer of power. So it can be interfered by a number of factors like weather and things like that. So the maturity of this technology remains to be seen. So people are still implementing this technology these days. In terms of the cost and benefits, so let's talk about the benefits first, right? So we know that obviously EV brings tremendous benefits in terms of reducing the oil dependence and also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, right? So according to the Department of Energy, so basically we can reduce the foreign oil dependence by 30 to 60%, the greenhouse gas emissions by 30 to 45%, right? So obviously the range depends on the exact mix of technologies, but that's a huge improvement from solely relying on fossil fuel energy in transportation, right? But obviously it comes with costs, right? So the EV adoption really hinge on the cost of EVs, right? So the costs are primarily the EV ownership cost and the charging infrastructure cost. So in terms of the ownership cost, so obviously the upfront cost, purchasing an EV is high, and higher than, purchasing a gasoline vehicle these days. But overall, during the lifetime of an EV, so they're pretty much comparable. So if you own an EV versus owning very, very popular like the pickup trucks or the SUV or the minivan, so the costs are very comparable over the lifetime, right? So the ownership costs include, for example, the maintenance of the vehicles, the fuel cost, using electricity versus using gasoline, and the insurance cost. So some estimates of like around $9,000 per year for EVs. So that's about the same for minivan and pickup trucks. A little bit higher, so about $10,000 for minivan and pickup trucks, but they're comparable. And then in terms of the cost of charging infrastructure, so these are the DOE, the Department of Energy's estimates, right? So for a single port, this EV charging port, so depending on the technology, so you're looking at level 1 is the cheapest, but if you're looking at the fast charging technology, you're looking at each port costs about $10,000 to $40,000. Very costly. So one single port costs $10,000 to $40,000. And then on top of that, you have the installation cost, right? So you're adding another $4,000 to $51,000 on top of the cost of the technology or the equipment itself, right? So it's very costly. So obviously without the proper subsidies from the government, for example, I think this will have a very hard time to move forward, right? So that's why it's very important to have this incentive and financing mechanism in place from the government, whether the state level or the federal level. And then for electric trucks, again, as I mentioned, the electric trucks presents a much bigger hurdle for electrification and also the adoption of electric trucks. So according to a California Air Resources Board study, so they assume this kind of penetration rate over the years from 2024 all the way to 2035. So if you assume this kind of penetration rate for the electric trucks, so they estimated that, for example, the air quality benefits, how much NOx, the oxides of nitrogen will be saved, and then the CO2 equivalent emissions will be saved. So a large amount, but I want to draw your attention to the overall cost or the annual savings here. So it shows that at the beginning, obviously, there will be a negative saving, meaning there will be a net cost to implementing such a system, electrification of trucks. But on the long run, so the saving will be positive. So the majority of the saving is from, for example, the fuel cost, this light blue bar, and this dark blue bar, which is this low carbon fuel standards saving. Okay, so these are the main. So in the long run, this is going to save cost as well for electric trucks. But at the near term, so we are seeing net cost for adopting electric trucks. All right. So the last challenge and opportunity point that I want to also briefly mention is this integration of power grid and electrified transportation. So the reason for that, if we're looking out into the future, that say we're going to have 100% electric vehicles in the transportation systems, so that's going to increase the demand of electricity, right, from the power grid. So then, this integration of planning in both sectors. So because right now these two sectors are pretty much independent, they don't work with each other. So transportation and electricity sectors. But I think as this electrification of transportation is moving forward, so I think these two sectors will have to come together to work out some kind of integrated planning for the future. So just to show how important this is, I'm going to give you an example, right? So if we're looking at the Tesla Model 3, which typically has a battery capacity of 50 kilowatt hours, and which means that it can last about 4.5 hours. And suppose the car is driving at 50 miles per hour. So what that means is if a person is driving from the suburb to downtown Chicago in the morning and then going back home in the evening, so then the commute time, let's say in total is about 2.5 hours. That's typical in Chicago. And then what that means is that the daily electricity consumption for this Model 3 car is about 30 kilowatt hours, which is almost half of a monthly electricity bill of a typical US family, just for a daily commute using an EV. So if you can consider, all these commuters, if they're all using EVs, things add up, right? So that represents a huge surge in electricity for the transportation market, right? And so that really means that we need to really think about how the power grid can respond to this huge demand from electrify the transportation sector. So there are some ways in current research looking at how to integrate this power grid system and the electrified transportation system. So there are some what's called the smart pricing mechanisms, including dynamic demand pricing, very much similar to the smart metering system in your household. When you are using the electricity in the off-peak hours, then you pay less, right? If you're using it during the rush hours, then you are charged more, right? So is a way to basically regulate this charging demand. There's also this what's called the electricity trading. So what that means is you plug in your EV and charge your battery, but if you don't use the battery, at the end of the day, so you can actually offer to sell it back to the grid. And the power plant will say, okay, or the company, the utility company may say, okay, I will pay you a certain amount of money to buy back your unused electricity. So it's called the electricity trading. So this way, then the utility company can save some additional demand for generating the electricity. And then for the customers, obviously they're happy to sell the electricity that they're not using, right? Or they don't need. And then there's another possible area of this integration is basically using the EVs as this auxiliary power supply, because EVs are moving, the power plants don't move. So what happens is in some remote areas or some in a local grid, when the power is down for some unexpected events, then you can actually deploy. So the utility company can deploy these EVs to supply electricity to those local areas, right? For example. So these are some examples of what could happen, and or these two sectors can work together to come up with this very smart strategies to really regulate the electricity demand. So I think these are all very exciting research areas. So basically, I think in summary, so this is an exciting time for transportation research, because you can see there are a lot of challenges and exciting opportunities in electrification of transportation. So I would say stay tuned, and we're going to have a lot more exciting research outcomes and findings to share with people. So I think that ends my talk. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin, for sharing your expertise on electric vehicles, where they are, where they have been, and where we're going with them. Just a really quick reminder to those who have joined us, a recording of this program will be on our website, the Alumni Exchange website, in approximately 10 days. And as Dr. Lin mentioned, we'll jump into questions. So one question I have to start deals with those environmental impacts, recognizing that, having electrical vehicles and that 1/3 of the usage for petroleum use, the emissions in the air, we know that electricity needs to come from somewhere. So the resources needed for that electricity, can you talk about how that compares to what a combustion engine is putting out and how that will impact the electric vehicles and our environment in the future?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. So absolutely right. So when we're talking about zero emission vehicles, it's not really zero emission, right, for EVs, because the electricity has to come from somewhere. So that's what we call the life cycle perspective. If you're looking at from how the energy is generated from the very beginning, then we actually have to take that into consideration. So electricity has to be generated somewhere by some forms. So, but overall, if you look at the way the electricity is generated, so again, as I mentioned in this slide, so it depends on the mix of the technology here, not just the charging or the battery technology, but also the electricity generation technology. So we're still looking at a pretty considerable environmental benefit of EVs. So obviously, if we're burning this dirty coal for in the power plants to generate electricity, so it's probably not the right solution. I think nowadays a lot of this power plants are moving towards renewable sources, right? So and also nuclear power plants and those type of options. So with those type of cleaner and renewable sources, then we do see the benefit of electric vehicles.
Great, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And you kind of mentioned the difference between using coal versus like fossil fuels and or renewable energy. Can you go in a little bit more into how the different types of resources impact that emissions?
You mean the amount of emissions, for example?
Yeah.
So right now, transportation is it's predominantly powered by fossil fuel energy, right? So, and transportation sector alone is responsible for about anywhere between 30 a quarter to a third of the energy consumption as well as greenhouse gas emissions. So that tells us how dirty the transportation sector is nowadays. So these are primarily from the burning fossil fuel, right? So if we are looking at using the other renewable energy, if we're using like hydro or wind power or solar, obviously these are very, very, very close to zero emissions, but we still need electricity or power to power those power plants, to generate electricity. So they're not completely zero, but I don't have the exact number on top of my head right now, but these are representing very low level of emissions. Nuclear, obviously, I think is probably the cleanest form of power generation. But obviously, there's debates about how safe it is, but that's a separate story, right?
Sure. Thank you. Again, another question related to emissions. Is there a concern that electric vehicles are just relocating, like where the CO2 emissions are going from areas where people can't afford to buy those vehicles to areas where the power is actually being generated?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So sort of getting to this equity issue, right? So people who can afford it, and they can use this clean technology, but then people cannot afford it. They continue to burn, use this dirtier vehicles. So there is this equity issue, and also where the power plants are typically located, right? This is always always an issue. It's not new, and so I think that's where the government policy and regulation come into play, because I think when they're financing the charging infrastructure or financing the adoption of EVs, I think they have to keep that in mind. Keep in mind of this equity issue. For people who cannot afford, maybe they can provide better or more incentives to this group of populations. So I'm not the expert in policy studies, but I think that's definitely something when the government is spending $5 billion to boost the EV charging infrastructure and the EV adoption, they have to be mindful how to spend those $5 billion. Absolutely.
Thank you. You did mention the prohibitive costs of replacing those electric vehicle batteries. What is the average lifespan of that kind of battery? And you talked a little bit about this, about what is happening once they're expended, but can you go into a little bit more about what's currently happening when those batteries are done?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another good question. So if you buy a Tesla, Model 3, they probably will promise you, or even other more lower end, let's say a Nissan or Nissan Leaf or Chevy. So they typically promise you 10 years of life warranty, right? So they say, okay, the battery could last 10 years. But oftentimes that's not the case. So 10 years is in theory, the battery can last 10 years, but depending on how you use it, and a lot of other things, the kind of weather Chicago has and things like that,
Yeah.
will really deteriorate the battery faster or slower, depending on that, on a lot of these factors. So I would say that for the current technology, typically what we see here is after 5 years or so, 5-6 years, you start seeing this really this large degradation of the battery performance in EVs. So yeah, so that's actually another challenge for EVs, not just the battery cost itself, but to replace it, how frequent you have to replace it. That's also adds up to the cost. Yeah. And another thing also I should mention is that the charging technology will also contribute to the deterioration of battery. So the faster the charging technology, the large damage to the battery.
Because it has to work harder.
Tends to be, yeah. So because this charging, it actually has to work harder on the battery. So the battery actually is more damaging. It's more damaging to the battery. Mm-hmm. So typically for passenger vehicles, level 1 is sufficient. If you can just let it charge overnight, do it that way. So unless you have to go somewhere and you run out of battery, electricity, then you have to do the fast charging. But otherwise, you can stay with the level 1. Yeah.
Awesome. And then one more question, because it's kind of timely. What impact do you think the ban on Russian oil will have for electric vehicles at home and abroad?
That's a very good question, and I don't know if I have the answer for that. So
that's fair.
Right. So obviously, I think on one hand, I think it serves as a push for EVs because I think a lot of this, including the EU countries and the US. So it's another wake-up call to say that we cannot rely on fossil fuel. We cannot rely on this crude oil, right? As much as we should. So I think that's a push for developing alternative fuel forms, right? And obviously, electricity powered vehicles is one of them. On the other hand, I think in the short term, so it's probably going to drive up the cost for everything. It's not just the oil cost, probably also the electricity cost, because this all related, right? So you need the oil energy form to generate electricity nowadays. So in the short term, I think probably will drive up the cost. So depending on how much cost it would drive, and also depending on how this whole thing escalated, to what level. So that may be a slowdown in the development of EVs or the adoption of EVs, but I hope this is only temporary. We'll hope this whole thing will be resolved quickly. And I think still this will not stop the adoption of EVs.
All right, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you joining us. We are at that hour, so we're going to stop for the questions. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Dr. Lin. We are so grateful for your incredible presentation and for your expertise, and so proud that you are a faculty member at UIC. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining me. And I wish I could see your faces, but I see some of you here. But we'll get there.
Thank you.
Hi, Pete, I saw you. One of my former students.
Oh, wonderful! It's always great. So just quickly close us out. We highly encourage you to join us for our next alumni exchange program, which will be next week, Wednesday, March 16th at noon Central Standard Time, as we explore the health impacts of emissions, specifically industry emissions in the Chicago area with the School of Public Health Associate Professor, Dr. Michael Kailis, and community partners. Dr. Kailis will share how community groups can rely on health data to voice their concerns and influence future industrial projects and their potential damage. To find a recording of our past episodes or to find more information about our upcoming programs, please visit go.uic.edu/alumni exchange. And of course, please be on the lookout for that survey that I mentioned at the beginning. Thank you again, Dr. Lin, and we look forward to seeing you all again at a future UIC Alumni Exchange event. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.